Sacco has always been interested in the First World War, especially in the Battle of the Somme, so he decided to illustrate this battle. Through this video of Sacco's illustration, we're going to show you the first day of the Battle of the Somme, which took place on the 1st of July 1916 and lasted until the 24th of November 1916. It was a battle that opposed the British and the Germans in their trench warfare.
Let's begin with horses. On this part of the document, we can see a lot of horses, but they're not used to what we can think of first when we see them. They're carrying something big, maybe supplies and equipment, and it's not usual because their speed and size could be an asset. But why aren't they on the front? Before the war and at the beginning, they were thought useful because of their speed and mobility. And in the first stage of the Somme's offensive, 100,000 horses were required by the British Army. By the way, one of the last cavalry offensive came during this battle. But as the war advanced, they understood horses were too much vulnerable to artillery and machine guns, and in addition they couldn't cross trenches and barbed wires. And especially during the Battle of the Somme, they struggled a lot in the mud, so they became useless on the front. Then, the cavalry charge became the infantry charge, bringing materials to the front, but some of them were still used as gun horses, and they were carrying heavy guns.
On the first day of the Battle of Somme, planes weren't very present. They appeared more after. As you can see, there aren't a lot of planes in our document. The Somme is commonly thought of as a ground offensive, but it was conducted from the earth too. The Royal Flying Corps, the air army of the British Army, lost 800 aircraft and 252 aircrew were killed.
At the beginning of the war, planes were extremely basic. Cockpits were open and instruments were rudimentary, and there were no navigational aids. The pilots had to rely on whatever maps could be found, a school atlas or a road map if necessary. According to what role did the planes play during the first day of the Battle of the Somme?
From 1915, the planes that were used to fight on the front were differentiated into fighters, bombers, and long-range bombers. By the end, they had become more sophisticated. The Royal Flying Corps was composed of 3,400 aircraft in 1918. First, they supplied the army with artillery operation and made some photography reconnaissance. Since 1915, they had dropped bombs on the German army.
There were about 70 different types of World War I planes, including fighters and bombers. Different countries used different markings so that their own soldiers wouldn't shut the planes down. World War I is the beginning of the air battles.
In the background, you can see soldiers who are loading and unloading shells. Did you know how many shells were launched before the battle? 1.5 million. What a huge number! In fact, artillery bombardments caused more casualties than any other weapons. The aim was to destroy enemy positions, defensive machine guns, and barbed wires so that the British infantry could walk across no man's land. That was their strategy. Howitzers were firing from well behind the front lines, and there was a mortar, a cannon, or a howitzer every 15 meters. At the beginning of the war, the cannons weren't very accurate. That's why they often bombarded their own front trenches.
What does the term colonial troops refer to? Colonial troops or colonial army refers to various military units recruited from areas as garrison troops in the colonies.
Garrison is the collective term for a body of troops stationed in a particular location. It is estimated that over 4 million non-whites fought for the Allies. They were coming from all Africa except Ethiopia and Liberia and the Middle East. India, it was a big disadvantage for Germany and a big advantage for France and Britain, the Allies.
Most of the soldiers were equipped with shovels or other tools to consolidate the trenches during bombardments. The trenches were wide and led the soldiers in different ways. On the left, all the soldiers were either resting or waiting to clear the entrance into the first support line trench.
Here we're in the front line support.
In the left part of the foreground, the soldiers put the weapons aside and sat. In the background, they were headed to the assault and carrying the weapons and mattresses as well. In the right part of the foreground, foremen were carrying some sort of boxes that contained some sort of food to store in the underground bunkers, just like what the Germans do to prepare themselves. The rest of the army was in line to get served their daily portion.
In the left-hand corner, soldiers were in line to get a drink and relax a bit before assault. All the other soldiers were equipped and ready to enter the no man's land. In the background, fragments of exploded rocks were seen.
Do you see the big explosion over there? In fact, a series of big mines are exploding under the Germans' positions, and the total of this amount is 453 tons of explosives.
The soldiers were exiting the trenches. They were all in possession of weapons for body-to-body battle with the enemy. We noticed that they were positioned in line when they got out, which in fact made them easier to kill. But was it the right position for them to take? And who is this unequipped man right in the center? He is smoking a pipe as if there was nothing to worry about. Well, he should actually be preparing himself. But have a closer look at his left arm. He was giving instructions to the soldiers, which can only mean that he was the commander.
More and more soldiers were exiting the trenches, still told to be in line. However, not only they were easily talked, but some of them had trouble continuing march. This line positioning was only done by the British during the battle. What a shame it was that the British army lost so many soldiers this easily.
The soldiers had taken cover in the trenches. However, it wasn't very efficient, as some soldiers were bombarded and then killed in the trenches, and many others were wounded, screaming in fear with pain. In the right-hand corner, the soldiers were getting rid of the corpses that were in the trenches. The bombardment had increased. The victims weren't identifiable. They were in pieces, bloody parts spread everywhere. As they didn't have any other choices than walking on the corpses of their comrades in order to survive. And if we have a closer look, soldiers were still in possession of the shovels and were digging out what was left of the comrades because it blocked their way.
All these shells exploding in the Germans' no man's land are the artillery barrage. By the end of the war, the artillery was more powerful and more accurate, and the cannons had become more mobile because of wheels. Artillery was the key weapon. It was so powerful that detonations were heard in England, that is 2 kilometers far from the battlefield.
We can see that the machine guns are focusing on the barbed wires where the British will pass through. Many people think that machine guns caused the most casualties in the Great War, but this is definitely wrong. Machine guns at the beginning of the war were very large and heavy, so they were not very useful in an attack against an enemy trench. However, they were devastating as defensive weapons. Indeed, a machine gun could fire 8 bullets a second. The Germans had lots of them, and they proved to be devastating against the British in the Battle of the Somme. British commanders were criticized for underestimating the machine gun. By the end of the war, machine guns were lighter and had become more and more effective.
During the rest, soldiers in the trenches did not get much sleep. When they did, it was in the afternoon, during daylight, and at night only for an hour at a time. They were woken up at different times, either to complete one of their daily chores or to fight. It was very difficult to sleep in the trenches because of the noises and the uncomfortable surroundings.
During World War I, soldiers were put through so much devastation. Life in trenches were very difficult because they were dirty and flooded. Cold weather was dangerous for soldiers' health, and they could even lose their fingers to frostbite. We could also find animals in the trenches like frogs, lice and rats that could grow to the size of a cat.
Trenches were unhygienic, dirty and smelly. There were no running water, and there were rats big as domestic cats. There were also dead bodies left on the ground and trench food.
Soldiers couldn't have good meals. They had a little variety of food, which mostly came in tins or cans. Their principal food were bread. In the leisure time, they could lay in cards or write or read letters from their relatives.
In consequence, soldiers were constantly tired and in danger of falling asleep. They had also difficulty staying up during the battle, so caffeine was injected to them.
The wounded arrived at an emergency exit where ambulances were parked in a station. At this emergency exit, a part of the soldiers were waiting for a doctor because they were seriously injured. One of them died because of the negligence. About the dead bodies, they were buried in a cemetery. They were placed here by villagers because there is a small village near the cemetery. There is a lot of ambulances. Some of them were working with motors and others were working with horses. As we said, a lot of ambulances for a lot of casualties. About 1.2 million of dead body and wounded among 4 million soldiers at the beginning.
Both England and Germany had a cavalry charge about 100,000 each at the beginning. But this number grew up so much in 4 years that over 8 million died on both sides fighting in the Great War.
Does this plane ring a bell to you? No, it's not a Dragonfly.
This plane is a Royal Aircraft Factory BE-2. It was a British single-engine, a two-seat biplane in service with the Royal Flying Corps.
What's the most important thing to know about this battle? You have to remember that the Battle of the Somme was a strategic place. That's why there is a lot of dead people in only one day. Have you ever seen such murderous battle before? As there were so many dead bodies and wounded, they couldn't find a way to clean the battlefield. We have to remember that the battle happened in one day. It's very important to keep it in your mind. So the process of getting out of the battlefield wounded and dead bodies were very difficult.
The first day of the Battle of the Somme was the most murderous one, with 60,000 dead or wounded people. This battle is 141 days of horror, with 1.3 million casualties.